Today's passage is another John contrast, as John likes to do, as we've seen. And this one today is between self-preservation and self-sacrifice. That's the contrast that's here today. Self-preservation, self-sacrifice. Self-preservation is the first law of nature, according to Darwinian thinking. The greater good is achieved when each person or each being acts in self-interest. And that's a foundational philosophy in modern thought. Many of us were educated in that idea. It's underlying there. But now even some scientists are starting to change their mind. There's a debate now between competition and cooperation. Is this really just self-interest, or is there cooperation going on? Which one really brings the greater good? Which one's more effective? And so that debate has actually risen and is going on. And so even some scientists are saying, I don't know if this hardcore Darwinian thinking is correct. Maybe we need to look at cooperation. And as we observe things, we're noticing this. And this is all fascinating stuff. But for us who believe and follow Jesus, it's very, very clear which side we're supposed to be on. There's no debate whatsoever. Jesus says you are to live in self-sacrifice. We were in Matthew last year, and the key passage is, if you want to follow me, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. And Jesus didn't just teach self-sacrifice, he lived it. So for us, there's just no question in this debate. We are to be on the side of self-sacrifice. And this is not an easy thing, is it? This is a tough challenge and a call to us. And so John's going to help us, though. He's going to help us here in this passage. He's going to scare us a little bit with the dark motivations and outcomes of self-preservation. It's really bad. And then he's going to display the beauty of self-sacrifice. And he's going to call us to be transformed. Here's the first contrast. This is John 11, 45 and 46.
Many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. But some went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done.
What happened was Lazarus was walking around. Lazarus, a guy that had died, was in the tomb for 4 days, is now walking around in public in Bethany near Jerusalem, and people are going to see him. It's a freak show, if you will. Everyone wants to see this thing that happened. Wow. People were going out in droves. They wanted to see, what, are you serious? I need to see this for myself. So that's what happened. And there's two reactions. People would see and they would believe in Jesus. They would see that miracle and they would say, I believe. I believe in this person, that he is the Son of God, that he's God in the flesh sent down to us. I believe that. And then others tattletaled, is what they did. You see that there was two responses, believe and tattletale. And to tattletale is natural when you're a child. You're learning the rules and you're feeling out what's right and what's wrong. And then what happens is the world's not so black and white, and so the children hold us parents accountable for explaining all the complexities and subtleties of life, and it's completely exhausting. And so basically what we say is, just don't tattletale, just stop. So it's natural for a child because they're trying to figure out these rules, and it's not as black and white as they would like it to be. It's easier to understand when it's black and white. Older kids and adults, adults can just be older kids, really. They tattletale to get something. They want to get a pat on the back. Good job. Thanks for letting us know. You're a team player. They do it for approval and reward. And in this case, there were some folks that did that, who somehow were blind to an absolute miracle and didn't believe, but then decided to tattletale instead. Didn't see the significance of Jesus raising a person from the dead. They didn't get that. They didn't see it because they instead wanted that approval. They wanted to use it. Yesterday at the beach, we saw whales. Okay, how many times have you been to the beach and you see whales out in the water? And a buddy of ours noticed it first, and you're not going to believe him till you see the whales yourself, are you? He was telling people, I got to see them myself. I got to make sure those are whales. Seeing is believing. And sure enough, there was a little pod of Atlantic right whales out there just enjoying springtime and creation. It was wonderful to see. But you had to see it with your own eyes. You had to see it yourself. And then once you did, you believed. What happens here is the difference between these people even saw and they didn't believe. They saw Lazarus. And so what happens is to believe is to sacrifice self. To not believe is self-preservation. It's the obstacle for most people in believing today, in faith, in believing in Jesus. It is this, I don't want to have to change. Our brain is actually always doing that. That's why it's so hard for an addict to get clean, is because the addict has created a new status quo in their brain with that substance, and their body and brain is telling them, keep the status quo. Don't change. And that's what our brain's always trying to do. We're trying to preserve ourselves, preserve what's happening now, preserve the status quo. Don't change. And we know, and when people are presented with Jesus, they know deep down in their heart, and they're right, that something's going to then have to change. If I believe in Jesus, then I'll have to change. Or if I believe in Jesus, then he'll start to change me. And so you see that this self-preservation is what's motivating people not to believe. They want to use this for their own good, their own self-preservation. Let me go tattletale to the powers that be, and then I'll get myself a better little situation going, or I'll maintain my place. Let me not risk it with these other people who are believing and doing something risky. To believe in Jesus is self-sacrifice. It is to submit oneself to Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Here's the second contrast. This is verses 47 and 48.
Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation."
So the Sanhedrin was the political power of the day. And they were contrasting themselves to Jesus, saying, this man is doing miraculous signs. What are we doing? What have we got? Never mind that he was always helping people. He wasn't David Copperfield doing magic shows for his own glory and TV ratings and fame. He was always doing something to help people. They weren't concerned about that. Self-preservation comes out of a place of fear. And that's what was hitting them right there. And that was what was motivating them. Fear. And they immediately jumped to their greatest fear. If Jesus was appointed leader of Israel, and all these people started following him instead of us, then Rome is going to see this as disorganization, a revolution, and therefore they're going to come and scatter our nation and destroy this temple. And especially get rid of our little thing that we've got going here. Because they had a nice little position there. Even though Rome was occupying Israel, they had found their little corner. They had the sacrificial festival thing locked up. They had cornered the market there, and they had a lot of muscle. They had Rome, who was giving them permission. They were certified to do it, and no one else was. They liked that. They liked their industry. They wanted to self-preserve their industry. And so that's what they were acting out of, fear that would be taken away from them. Once people have something, they rarely give it up. Self-preservation always seeks to maintain the status quo. But in order to grow, we have to leave the status quo. Jesus is always challenging us. Jesus is alive and moving and living. Jesus doesn't say, I want you to fortify yourself and keep everything the same. We naturally, that's what we do, and we do it out of fear. Jesus is saying, no, I want you to take risks. I want you to grow. Forget the status quo. Since I've come into this world, it is moving towards the kingdom. I want you to be part of that movement, not staying the same, not protecting the status quo, not living out of fear. To grow, you have to leave the status quo. This is 49 through 52.
One of them, Caiaphas, the high priest that year, said, You do not seem to have grasped the situation at all. You fail to see that it is to your advantage that one man should die for the people, rather than that the whole nation should perish. He did not speak in his own person, but as high priest of that year, he was prophesying that Jesus was to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather together into one the scattered children of God.
John uses incredible irony, doesn't he, here? This is amazing. We have Caiaphas, the high priest, who speaks with absolute clarity about what Jesus' mission is. Just absolute, perfect clarity and understanding of exactly what Jesus is doing. He is to die in order to save and unify the children of God. If Jesus had a mission statement, it would have been right here. This is it. I'm going to sacrifice myself in order to save creation. That's what I'm doing here. Caiaphas said it perfectly with perfect clarity. And it's a worldwide mission. It's including but not limited to Israel. Now this is evidence, guys, of that God can use a selfish jerk at any time for his own purposes, so fear not. Amen? Even a jerk that says, this is God's will. I've seen it happen in my own lifetime. And then come to find out, it certainly was, wasn't it? God can work through any means. Fear not people like this, because God is still more powerful, and he can work through anybody. Of course, Caiaphas had no idea what he was talking about. What he thought is that killing Jesus would help avoid their greatest fear, which was the crisis with Rome. That was his fear. And he thought, now look, God even told me this. We're going to kill Jesus, and then we're going to be okay. So come on, stop worrying, you guys. Of course, not much longer in 70 AD, Rome did come, and their greatest fear came true. In their little cornered market has never been in operation since. Self-preservation focuses on what is temporal. He knew, they all knew in the bottom of their heart that this was ending. This was not going to last forever. Things in the temporal physical realm, they don't last. They die, and then they're born again. Everything has a life cycle. When I was in business school, they talked about that. Look, know that anything you start has a life cycle. It might hit traction and go and become popular, but then it's going to fade and it's going to die, and you need to understand that whole piece of that and make the money, make hay when there's sunshine. Okay? Everything is going to die. Everything's going to change. Yet for some reason we have this thing about wanting to preserve it and not letting it. Now I'm all about preserving our environment and species and those things. I'm not talking about that. That's our responsibility as God gave to Adam and Eve. That He said, take care of my garden. So we should try to preserve nature because we're the ones that have oftentimes done the damage. And so we want to be responsible, good stewards. But what we often try to preserve is these things that are temporal in nature. Anyway, they're going to end. And so we put all this effort into not letting something that's going to die, in trying to not let it die. And so what are we doing? Why are we spending all this energy doing this? That's irony, that the self-preserving people are trying to preserve something that isn't going to preserve. Jesus' self-sacrifice opened up the eternal realm of things that do preserve. A kingdom, a nation, in contrast to the one that Caiaphas understood about Israel, another nation, an eternal nation that transcends all that separates all the human nations, economies, traditions, race, national origin, all these things. It transcends all that stuff. It's an eternal kingdom that unifies brothers and sisters, children of God. That's the kingdom that does last. And Jesus is all about that kingdom. And He's saying, why don't you do things why don't you invest in that kingdom? You keep investing in things that aren't going to last. Invest in something that lasts. Make that your priority. Why are you self-preserving with things that are not going to last? Self-sacrifice. Here's the irony. Self-sacrifice, and then you're investing in something that does last. And Jesus showed us that. And then the treasure now, among many things, is that we're free from that anyway. We're free from living life that way, in fear of change. In fear that whatever we're into won't last. It's not going to. Things are going to change. Why do we live in fear of that? That's the natural way of things. Don't put your treasure there. Don't put your heart there. Don't fear that. Seek the kingdom. He'll take care of all the temporal things, and then He'll give you the joy of the kingdom and freedom from that self-preservation fear mindset. This is 11:53 through 12:2.
So from that time on, the Jewish leaders began to plot Jesus' death. As a result, Jesus stopped His public ministry among the people and left Jerusalem. He went to a place near the wilderness, to the village of Ephraim, and stayed there with His disciples. It was now almost time for the Jewish Passover celebration, and many people from all over the country arrived in Jerusalem several days early so they could go through the purification ceremony before Passover began. They kept looking for Jesus, but as they stood around the temple, they said to each other, "What do you think? He won't come for Passover, will he?" Meanwhile, the leading priests and Pharisees had publicly ordered that anyone seeing Jesus must report it immediately so they could arrest him. 6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus arrived in Bethany, the home of Lazarus, the man he had raised from the dead. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with them.
Martha served. That sounds familiar, right? Okay. Jesus did a little self-preservation here. I don't know if you noticed that, but yes, he did. He had some heat, and so he removed himself from Jerusalem for a little while until Passover. And it was timing that was what was driving him, not fear. He knew he was going to die. He wasn't trying to self-preserve. He was waiting for the right time, and Passover was the right time. The connection to the celebration in Exodus, a fulfillment in meaning for all these sacrifices, a fulfillment of Psalm and Old Testament prophecy. We read Isaiah 53 this week. That's what he was waiting for. I said last week, timing is everything, and God knows everything. So we're going to have to trust him. Timing is everything. It's so important. And we have no idea what the right time is. God does. And he leads us in it. Self-preservation forces. When we're in the mode of self-preservation, we're always forcing things. Forcing it. And then, therefore, messing up the timing of things. When we're in self-sacrifice mode, what we've done is we've laid back, we're relaxing and flowing downstream of living water. God's timing. The Beatles were onto something with that one, okay? Self-sacrifice relaxes. I don't know what stream they were, but there is a stream of living water. There is a flow to this life. It is God's will, and we can float down it when we sacrifice ourselves and lay upon it and float and trust God. If we're forcing things, we've messed up the whole thing. And people that float on it are the most joyous, fun people to be around. And it just is. This is my experience with life. I know when I force things, when I'm in self-preservation mode, I have just messed up everything. When I trust God and I sacrifice that part and I say, God, this is yours, and I'm going to trust you. And then things come into place. I'm surprised each day. I'm grateful and joyful, relaxed, not worried. Hello, my name is Lint. What God said was, trade me, give me your anxiety, and I'll give you back my joy. Let's have an exchange here this Lent. Sacrifice to me your anxiety, your pushiness, your forcingness, your self-preservation. And in return, I'll give you my joy that lasts, that's real. And so we can see how God does things. We'll see how camp goes this summer, Nicole. But when Nicole said, I think I want to go to a different camp, I say, great. But we're not going to go to the internet or pick up pieces of mail that are sent us and choose a camp that way. We're going to pray about it, and we're going to let God answer the question. And so, and time went by, and it's like, oh, it's time we got to get planning, and it had that sense to it. And then maybe we should go to Guatemala. And then in a conversation about the Guatemala trip, a camp gets mentioned. And then, here we go. And that's the answer. That's the way we can live life. That's the way God operates. When we just say, I'm not going to force this. I'm going to wait for God's timing, because God's timing is perfect. Timing is everything, and God knows everything. Romans 12:2, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. That's forcing things. That is fear. That is self-preservation. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then, when you've self-sacrificed, you've renewed your mind, you say, I'm trading my anxiety for joy. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to float with this. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. If we're forcing things, then we don't give him any space to work, and we don't really know what his will is. We've got to trust him. I'm sure you've had the experience. God knows when you're over it, and you've got to get over it before he answers the prayer. You know, anybody know what I'm talking about? He knows. Did you get over it yet? No, I haven't gotten over it. I haven't really. And getting over it is really giving over it. I haven't really given this over. That's why we have Mary Reed. We weren't able to get pregnant, and I said, Murray, we're going to have to get over it and give it over. And God knew the moment that we did, and that's how it happens. The world is a pattern of self-preservation. Leave it. Go in the flow of joy, living water. This is 3-6.
Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it.
A perfect contrast of a giver and a taker. Perfect contrast. The giver, Mary, had something precious, and she was waiting for the perfect time. And when the time came, she used it to glorify Jesus. It's a giver. The taker, Judas, was skimming off Jesus all along. Skimming Jesus. Come on. Can you get any worse than that? And in his self-preservation, he betrayed the one who loved him the most. That's how bad, that's how ugly it can get. Which one had more joy? The giver or the taker? This is 7 and 8.
Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me."
Yes, Judas would not always have Jesus to skim off of. In fact, he'd have one more deal. Look at how self-preservation, how the cycle of evil continues. When you're in this mode, look at how it continues. This is 9 through 11.
When all the people heard of Jesus' arrival, they flocked to see him, and also to see Lazarus, the man Jesus had raised from the dead. Then the leading priests decided to kill Lazarus too, for it was because of him that many of the people had deserted them and believed in Jesus.
All right. I know God told you to murder Jesus, but did he say anything about Lazarus? Out of their self-preservation, evil is lumped upon evil, sin upon sin, and another person is murdered who doesn't deserve it. But with Jesus, the Holy Spirit is here with us. I'm not going to be with you, Judas, self-preserving jerk, much longer. You can use me one more time. I'm not going to be with you much longer. But those, and he promises this in John as we go along, but those who believe in him, those who have made that self-sacrifice of faith and want to live in that flow of God's will and continue. Every day we wake up in self-preservation. This is a daily sacrifice we have to make. This is your God. This is your day, God. Those people Jesus is with every day. He's with us. And he's calling us to self-sacrifice every day. He's calling us to live like him, to follow him, to transform us. And we need his help. And so let's spend a few moments asking him to help us. Where is it that you need to change from self-preservation to self-sacrifice? Is there an area of life where you need to do that? Or do you just need to get into his flow? So let's spend a few moments in prayer asking God to help us to transform us.